The mocking laugh of a teacher nearly shattered the self-esteem of an elderly janitor. But then, the truth walked in with a NASA badge on its chest. Have you ever experienced a moment that caused the entire room to fall into such a deep, awkward silence? That's exactly what happened at Prescott Elementary School, right in the crowded hall with teachers and staff in Chandler, Arizona. Prescott School has long been known for its friendly atmosphere, where each year they organize events to bond the community of teachers and staff, fostering a cooperative and positive environment. This year was no different. Prescott School was excited to host its Career Day, a special event where each staff member and teacher had the chance to introduce the careers of their loved ones, sharing their pride and inspiring new dreams among all participants. That morning, the school's auditorium was carefully decorated with colorful banners and fresh bouquets. Simple wooden chairs were neatly arranged, where Prescott teachers and staff eagerly gathered. The room was filled with laughter and light-hearted banter, the sound of cheerful voices echoing throughout the large space. In the far corner of the hall, quietly standing apart from the lively crowd, was Mrs. Evelyn Carter, a nearly 60-year-old black woman, the longest-serving janitor at the school. On a typical day, Evelyn worked silently and steadily, cleaning each classroom, every hallway, almost invisible to the eyes of the others. For most teachers, she was just a fleeting figure, a slender woman with gray-streaked hair, often with her head down, quietly working, rarely speaking or engaging in casual conversation. Evelyn had grown used to this. Silence and gentleness were her chosen shields to protect herself from unfriendly glances and sharp, unintentional remarks that could sting like needles. But today, her heart raced faster than usual, a mix of nervousness and pride creeping into her mind. What no one knew was that behind Evelyn's modest, unassuming demeanor, there was a story filled with pride that she had kept to herself for all these years. Her only son, Nathan Carter, was a brilliant aerospace engineer working at NASA, a place that, to Evelyn, was enough to fill her heart with immense pride just by thinking about it. But Evelyn had never shared this story with anyone at the school, knowing that society's gaze would find it hard to believe such a miracle could come from a janitor like her. However, on this special day, something deep within her heart urged her to break the silence she had held for so long. She decided that, for the first time in her life, she would share the truth with all the pride of a mother. Evelyn took a deep breath, tightened the cloth of her handkerchief, and her eyes turned toward the podium, where it would soon be her turn to stand up and share her story. Little did she know that, in just a few minutes, what she was about to say would lead to a life-changing event, forever altering her life and self-esteem. It would also mark the beginning of a series of dramatic and profound events to come. Evelyn clenched the edge of her handkerchief, the dampness in her palms reminding her of just how tense she was. But there was no turning back now, as the clear voice of the secretary interrupted her thoughts. Next, please welcome Mrs. Evelyn Carter, representing the janitorial staff, to share about the career of a family member. Eyes in the room immediately turned toward Evelyn, as though they had just noticed an unfamiliar figure in their midst. She hesitated for a moment before slowly taking a few steps toward the small podium. Whispers grew louder, but she tried to push them out of her mind, keeping her heartbeat steady. Evelyn adjusted the faded shirt that had been washed too many times, lifted her head, and met the curious, skeptical eyes of the crowd. "Hello, everyone," Evelyn said, her voice soft but clear. "Today, I'm happy to share, for the first time, about my son's career with all of you, my fellow teachers and colleagues." The room fell into a brief silence, eyes focused and expectant, yet tinged with doubt, waiting for what she would say next. "My son's name is Nathan Carter," she continued, her eyes suddenly lighting up with pride, a pride she hadn't dared show so openly in a long time. "Nathan is an aerospace engineer, and he currently works at NASA, specializing in communication systems with spacecraft on Mars. At that moment, the entire room seemed to freeze. The atmosphere grew thick, and the looks of her colleagues shifted quickly from surprise to suspicion. Suddenly, a few quiet chuckles came from the back of the room, quickly spreading through the hall like a wave of cruel sound. Evelyn froze, the proud smile that had just appeared on her face vanishing in an instant. The laughter grew louder, more distinct, and increasingly bitter. The looks of disdain aimed directly at her, and among the laughter, the loudest, most cutting was that of Mr. Robert Mitchell, the fifth-grade teacher. Mr. Mitchell, a man in his late 40s with meticulously groomed salt-and-pepper hair, whose serious face usually wore an air of authority, now twisted into a mocking, contemptuous smile. He leaned toward his colleague, shaking his head and speaking loud enough for Evelyn and the entire room to hear. "NASA?" Mrs. Evelyn must have watched too many science fiction movies. The laughter grew even louder and more intense after Mr. Mitchell's words, fueling others to join in. Evelyn stood there, motionless, her entire body numb, feeling as though hundreds of invisible needles were digging into her heart. Her eyes blurred, but Evelyn fought to keep the tears from falling, refusing to let them see her weakness in this moment. Mr. Mitchell, seemingly eager to emphasize his skepticism, stared directly at Evelyn with a cold gaze, intentionally raising his voice again. "Maybe you've confused your son's profession, Mrs. Carter. NASA isn't a place just anyone can walk into." A few scattered chuckles followed, but this time they were quieter, more hesitant, as if some in the room were beginning to sense that something wasn't right. Evelyn stood there, her shoulders trembling slightly, but she said nothing in response. The pride she had cherished for so many years was ruthlessly trampled underfoot by the very people she had silently served every day. She looked down, her hands trembling as they clutched the hem of her shirt, painfully realizing the harsh truth. She was just an old woman doing a cleaning job, and this world seemed to have no place for her to be proud of anything. Finally, Evelyn silently stepped down from the podium amid the ongoing murmurs, returning to her usual corner. She sat down in her familiar spot, her eyes staring blankly at the cold tile floor, trying to hold back the bitter tears that threatened to spill. Evelyn understood that from this moment on, the small world where she worked every day had become a much harsher place, simply because she dared to speak a truth that no one wanted to believe. After that painful moment, Evelyn's once quiet life at Prescott School seemed to grow even darker. She returned to her usual cleaning tasks, but now each movement felt heavy, as if invisible chains were tightly wrapped around her soul. Evelyn knew she had inadvertently become the new topic of gossip, a joke for those who had always ignored her existence. Since she stepped down from the podium, the laughter had faded, only to be replaced by cruel whispers. The murmurs echoed through the hallways, in every corner of the teacher's lounge, in places where Evelyn had once felt so familiar and at peace. For the first time in many years of working there, she felt like the very hallways she had cared for so deeply had suddenly turned their backs on her, cold and unfamiliar. "Mrs. Evelyn's acting strange today," the secretary of the principal's office muttered as she passed the teacher's lounge, her voice just loud enough for Evelyn, who was cleaning the window outside the door, to hear. "NASA, really? Who's going to believe that? I've never even met anyone who works at NASA." "I think she just wanted to impress us," replied another female teacher in a soft voice, dripping with sarcasm. Her cleaning job at the school wasn't enough to make her proud, so she had to borrow NASA's fame. Those words, though fleeting, lodged deep in Evelyn's mind. She lowered her head, trying to focus on her work, her hands trembling as she wiped away invisible smudges on the glass, as if trying to wipe away the cruel words. But they didn't stop. They kept ringing in her ears, sharper and more painful in the days that followed. In the early mornings, when Evelyn first arrived at school, the whispers would trail behind her down the long hallway. The teachers who used to greet her with a friendly nod now only looked at her from a distance, their condescending glances quickly shifting elsewhere. Evelyn understood the meaning behind those looks better than anyone else. They said she was just a poor woman trying to make her miserable life seem more important by telling a far-fetched story. Meanwhile, the person who hurt Evelyn the most, Mr. Robert Mitchell, didn't bother hiding his disdain. He was well known at school for his stern demeanor, always appearing polished and sophisticated. But after Evelyn stood up to speak, he openly expressed his contempt every time he crossed paths with her. As he passed by Evelyn, he would deliberately slow his pace, looking her up and down with a faint, mocking smile, then shaking his head as if pitying her. Once, when Evelyn was cleaning at the end of the hallway, she distinctly heard Mr. Mitchell whispering to a male colleague, "Look at that, NASA." It's pathetic when people have to make up stories like that just to feel a little more important. That comment felt like a sharp knife stabbing through Evelyn's heart. She stood frozen, her eyes blurry, unable to even see the tile floor beneath her. Evelyn wanted to turn around, to scream that she wasn't lying, that Nathan really was an engineer at NASA. But the words caught in her throat. She knew that no matter what she said, those people would never believe her. From that day on, Evelyn grew quieter and more isolated. She still diligently did her job, but her mind was constantly tormented by the ever-growing mocking whispers. Evelyn felt as though she was surrounded by an invisible fog, suffocating, dark, and inescapable. The pain slowly sank deeper into her heart, leaving her often sleepless, restless each time she arrived at school. The colleagues who had once exchanged pleasantries with Evelyn now avoided her as if she carried some contagious disease. When they passed by, they would purposely walk faster or pretend to be busy with their phones and papers to avoid engaging with her. No one said anything outright, but Evelyn knew they had quietly pushed her out of this small community, just because, for once, she had dared to take pride in her son. It hurt even more when Evelyn realized that those condescending stares weren't just hurting her. They were also attacking the greatest pride of her life, Nathan. They were trampling on the most precious thing she had ever had, the thing she had sacrificed her entire hard life to nurture, a good, talented son with a successful career. Evelyn had never imagined that her pride in her son could turn into such a deep wound. Each evening, after the school bell rang, Evelyn would sit alone in the small room next to the janitor's closet, silently wondering if she had been wrong to show her pride. Evelyn tried to hold back the tears, but sometimes they still streamed down her cheeks, quietly and hot, like the pains she was silently enduring every day. As time passed, Evelyn didn't know what else to do but endure, silently cleaning each classroom, each hallway, as if trying to wipe away all the cruel words. But deep in her heart, the pain and the hurt piled up, like an invisible weight pressing heavier and heavier on her already worn-out shoulders. And little did Evelyn know, at that very moment, Nathan had started to notice something was wrong with his mother. He was about to return home, and Prescott School would soon have to face the truth they had once mocked and disregarded, a truth so surprising and powerful that they would no longer be able to deny it. That afternoon, as the sun began to set behind the rooftops, Evelyn quietly walked along the familiar path home. The darkness slowly spread, and each streetlight's pale yellow glow seemed to blur in her eyes. Evelyn felt the weight of her steps, heavier than ever before. as though all the harsh words she had heard throughout the day were pressing down on her body, holding her in a silent pain she couldn't escape. Evelyn's small house nestled on a quiet street, once a place that always brought her peace after a long day's work. But tonight, even this familiar home could not soothe the turmoil in her heart. She opened the door, stepping into the small room engulfed in silence, save for the ticking of the wall clock, a cold reminder of the loneliness and hurt she had just endured. Evelyn set down her bag, removed her faded coat, and walked into the kitchen. She tried to calm her mind with familiar tasks like preparing dinner, but before long her hands trembled and a knife fell onto the table. She stood still for a long time, her eyes starting to blur as the tears she had held back all day finally broke free, flowing silently like a steady rain. She sat down in the chair in the corner of the kitchen, burying her face in her hands, unable to suppress the sobs that escaped. The pain and humiliation that had built up from the morning's events suddenly overwhelmed her, pulling her into a spiral of emotion she could not escape. "Mom?" A concerned voice suddenly called from the kitchen door, startling Evelyn and causing her to look up. Standing there, with a mix of worry and surprise on his face, was Nathan, her son, the one person Evelyn was prouder of than anything else in the world. Nathan had just returned home from the NASA Research Center after a long day of work, intending to surprise his mother. But what he hadn't expected was to find her in such a state. Evelyn quickly wiped her tears, trying to hide her wet face, but Nathan quickly approached, knelt beside her, and gently took her trembling hand. "What's going on, Mom? Please talk to me," Nathan asked earnestly, his eyes full of deep concern. But Evelyn remained silent, her head bowed, overwhelmed by shame and heartache, unable to speak. Nathan softened his tone, his voice steady but filled with affection. "Mom, no matter what's going on, I'm here. Will you tell me?" Nathan's words were gentle, like a reassuring balm, but they also made Evelyn's heart ache. Finally, she couldn't hold back any longer. The sobs choked in her throat, and with a painful confession she spoke. "Nathan, I did something foolish." Her voice trembled, filled with torment. Nathan furrowed his brow, his worry deepening as he saw the deep pain in his mother's eyes. "There's nothing foolish about it, Mom. Please, tell me." Nathan reassured her, gently squeezing her hand as encouragement. Evelyn took a deep breath, her red-rimmed eyes locking with the loving gaze of her son. She slowly began recounting the entire story from career day at school, when she had gathered the courage to speak about Nathan's work at NASA. Her voice grew quieter, more painful and full of shame as she described the reaction of her colleagues, especially the cold, disdainful attitude of Mr. Mitchell. Evelyn could not hide the deep hurt as she recalled the cruel mocking words that had echoed in her ears throughout the day. "I didn't think that just one thing I said could make people mock and belittle me like that," Evelyn said, her voice quivering as if she might cry again. "I'm sorry, Nathan. I shouldn't have said that." Nathan listened quietly as his mother finished telling the story, his face shifting from concern to astonishment and finally to anger. But that anger quickly softened into deep tenderness and empathy for his mother. "You don't need to apologize, Mom," Nathan said gently, his voice strong but full of emotion. "The ones who are wrong aren't you. It's the people who looked down on you like that. I'm more proud of you than anything in the world. You know that, right?" Evelyn remained silent, her eyes blurred with tears as she listened to Nathan's words. In that moment, she understood that no matter how much it hurt, Nathan would always be by her side. But the pain from the mockery at school still lingered, buried deep in her heart, not so easily soothed. Nathan gazed deeply into his mother's eyes, as though thinking about something. He knew that this situation couldn't simply end with a few comforting words or a gentle hug. It was time for him to stand up, prove the truth, and protect his mother's dignity. "Mom, I think it's time for me to visit your school," Nathan said, his voice calm but carrying a determined resolve. Evelyn looked up at Nathan, confused, and moved at the same time. She knew what he was about to do, but a sense of unspoken fear stirred within her. What scared her most was that this hurt might spill over to Nathan. But Nathan, looking at her with a gaze full of trust and determination, softly spoke a line that made Evelyn feel a flicker of strength rise within her. "I won't let anyone hurt you again." Nathan gripped his mother's hand tightly, his gaze fixed on Evelyn with determination, but also tenderness. He could feel the warmth of her old hands, trembling slightly from fear and hurt, making his heart ache with anger and sorrow. But Nathan reminded himself that at this moment his mother needed comfort and encouragement more than his burst of anger. He took a deep breath, trying to control his emotions before speaking gently. "Mom, I understand how much today's words hurt you. But please trust me, you don't have to bow your head to anyone. You didn't do anything wrong, you just spoke the truth." Evelyn quietly looked at Nathan's serious, strong face. She felt a sense of safety when gazing into her son's confident, sincere eyes. But at that moment, her heart was still filled with haunting doubts and fears. The cruel, mocking words of her colleagues still echoed in her ears, making her feel smaller and more helpless than ever before. "Nathan," Evelyn whispered, her voice weak with concern. "I know you want to protect me, but will that really make things better? I'm afraid that if you go to school, people will think I'm just bragging, trying to show off. I don't want you to suffer the same ridicule I did." Nathan looked at his mother, understanding the torment she was going through. He gently brushed the silver strands of hair falling across her forehead, her face etched with the wrinkles of time. His gaze was soft but resolute. "Mom, you always taught me that the truth is the most important thing, right? Those people mocked you because they don't know the truth. And I believe that when the truth is made clear in front of them, they won't have any reason to look down on you anymore." Evelyn looked at Nathan, feeling her heart both warm and troubled. She had lived more than half her life in silence, enduring, always reminding herself that it was best to avoid any trouble. Now, her son's decision to confront those who had looked down on her made her more confused than ever. "Nathan," she said softly, gripping his hand tightly, her voice full of worry, "I know you love me, but I've been enduring these things for so long, you don't need to do this." Nathan shook his head, his expression becoming a little more serious and firm. He looked deeply into his mother's eyes, trying to convey his unwavering belief. "Mom, enduring doesn't mean accepting others hurting you. I can't stand by and watch you suffer in silence anymore. You've sacrificed so much for me, and you don't deserve to be treated like this. No one has the right to look down on you." Evelyn fell silent, her heart stirred with a mixture of fear and emotion. She saw in Nathan the strong, decisive image of her late husband, whom she had loved so deeply. Nathan had inherited his father's resilience, courage, and ability to stand up for what was right. It made her proud, yet filled her with constant worry. "I'm afraid," Evelyn said softly, her eyes trembling with emotion. "I'm just afraid that if you show up, they'll continue to gossip and mock you too." Nathan smiled gently, as if reassuring her that he wasn't afraid of such trivial things. "Mom, what they say doesn't matter to me. I don't care what they think about me, but I do care about you being able to hold your head high, to live with dignity and pride. If protecting you means I have to face ridicule, I'm fully prepared to do that." Nathan's voice was firm, filled with confidence, like an invisible force gently comforting Evelyn's soul. She looked at her son, her eyes welling up with emotion. "Nathan, all I want is for you to be happy, to live peacefully with the success you've worked so hard for. I don't want you to get caught up in unnecessary gossip because of me." Nathan gently wiped away the tears streaming down her cheek, shaking his head. "Mom, you're wrong. If you have to suffer, then none of my success would mean anything. You've always said that the most important thing is to live true to ourselves, and now you're the one trying to avoid that." Nathan's sincere words were like a bell ringing, awakening Evelyn's soul. She looked at him, the love and pride in her heart swelling more than ever before. But the worry still lingered, haunted by the cruel words she had heard that day. "Nathan," Evelyn said quietly, her eyes filled with anxiety, "are you sure that your presence can change their prejudices?" Nathan looked at her, replying gently but with determination. "I'm not sure about that, but what I am sure of is that I won't let you bow your head again. If they want to doubt and mock you, they'll have to face me first." Nathan's words were strong and clear, a sincere promise he made to his beloved mother. Evelyn remained silent, her heart touched by the bravery in his resolve. Though her uncertainty still lingered, in this moment she felt a sense of peace and a flicker of hope reignited in her soul. While the future was still uncertain, she understood one thing clearly. From this moment on, she was no longer alone. Nathan had decided to stand by her, to protect her from all the hurt from the outside world, a world that had long tried to crush the good things they could never understand. The morning of Career Day finally arrived, bringing with it a buzz and excitement that enveloped the entire Prescott school. But for Evelyn, today was the day she had both anxiously anticipated and feared more than any other in her life. Evelyn stood quietly in a corner near the hallway door to the auditorium, positioned just enough to observe everything without attracting too much attention from her colleagues. Her hand trembled slightly. Her heart beat so loudly that it felt as if its rhythm echoed down the long hallway. Her eyes were fixed on the large door at the end of the corridor, the door through which Nathan would walk in just a few moments, stepping up beside her and facing all those who had doubted and mocked her. Inside the auditorium, Robert Mitchell, his familiar stern expression in place, was smoothly managing the presentations with calm composure. Even from a distance, Evelyn could clearly see his confidence as he introduced each speaker. His tall frame, meticulously styled salt and pepper hair, sharp, cold gaze, and the natural authority he exuded, all made him someone who could easily command trust and obedience. But to Evelyn, all of that now felt suffocating and added to her growing anxiety. "Thank you, Ms. Andrews, for a wonderful presentation on the nursing profession." Mr. Mitchell's deep voice resonated clearly across the auditorium, a polite but distant smile always on his face. "Next, we'll hear from a parent in the construction industry." Each time Mitchell spoke, Evelyn felt as though a cold wave ran down her spine. Since the day before, every time their eyes met, she had seen the subtle mockery in his gaze, full of sharp, cruel implications. That look had become a haunting presence, eroding her confidence and deepening her fear about Nathan's upcoming entrance, especially in front of that man. She glanced at the clock on the wall, just a few minutes until it was her turn at the podium. Her heart thudded with anxiety. Evelyn checked her phone once more, but there were no messages or calls from Nathan. A wave of invisible fear surged within her. Was something delaying him? Would he not make it in time? And would she once again have to face the mocking, contemptuous stares of the entire auditorium? These thoughts crashed through Evelyn's mind like crashing waves, making it impossible for her to stay still. She stepped out a few paces toward the main door, her eyes scanning the road leading to the school, hoping to see Nathan. Each second felt like an eternity. In that moment, she felt as though all the hope and self-respect Nathan had been trying to restore in her over the past days were slowly slipping away, replaced by the familiar feelings of helplessness and despair she had always tried to avoid. "Evelyn!" A sudden voice behind her startled her, and she turned quickly. Standing not far away was Julia, the young music teacher, one of the few in the school who had always been kind and respectful toward her. Julia approached her, looking at her with a concerned but sincere gaze. I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. Are you okay?" Julia asked hesitantly, as if she too felt awkward asking this question at that moment. Evelyn forced a smile, trying to hide the deep anxiety within her, and nodded gently. "Thank you, Julia, I'm fine." But Evelyn's eyes betrayed her, showing all the worry she couldn't conceal. Julia studied her for a long moment before softly continuing, her voice gentle and full of empathy. "I know these past few days have been tough for you, but I believe you're not lying. You're not the kind of person to do that." Julia's words were like a small warm light in the cold darkness that had enveloped Evelyn in recent days. Evelyn felt her eyes welling up with tears, a wave of emotion she hadn't expected. She nodded in thanks to Julia, then turned her gaze back to the door, silently praying that Nathan would arrive in time. "And now," Mr. Mitchell's voice rang out once again, this time rising slightly, as if to make sure Evelyn heard every word clearly. "Let's wait for a special guest that Miss Evelyn Carter promised to bring us, an engineer from NASA, if I remember correctly." Mitchell's sarcastic tone sent a ripple through the room, and a few quiet chuckles followed, quickly subdued by the politeness of the crowd. Evelyn bit her lip, feeling the sting of humiliation and shame flood her once again. Her heart twisted painfully as her eyes desperately fixed on the door. Just as Evelyn felt she might collapse under the weight of her despair, the large door at the end of the hallway suddenly swung open, light streaming in from the outside. And there, in that moment, the familiar strong silhouette of Nathan appeared. He stepped into the school with calm confidence, his suit jacket crisp, and the NASA badge shining brightly on his chest. The sight of Nathan made Evelyn feel as though all the fear, anxiety, and despair had evaporated in an instant. But she also knew that the biggest challenge still lay beyond that auditorium door, where Mitchell and dozens of skeptical eyes awaited them. And this time, Evelyn understood. No matter what the outcome, she would never be alone again. Nathan had arrived, and the battle for her dignity and self-respect was truly about to begin. As Mr. Mitchell was about to announce the end of the introductions, his voice rang out with smugness and disdain. "It seems the special guest from NASA won't be making it today, perhaps due to some important missions out in space." A few scattered laughs echoed from several teachers and staff in the auditorium, causing Evelyn to feel as if her heart was being squeezed. She could sense that the last remnants of her small hope were slowly fading away, with every laugh and mocking glance feeling like invisible daggers piercing deeper into her soul. Mitchell held the microphone with a satisfied expression, his lips curling into a barely concealed sneer. He deliberately scanned the room as if to reaffirm that Evelyn was just a humble, pitiful woman trying to make up a fanciful story to gain attention. For him, this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was an opportunity to further solidify his image as a powerful and intellectual figure in the eyes of those around him. "It's a shame that everyone won't get to meet a NASA engineer today," Mr. Mitchell continued, his voice low and deliberate, emphasizing each word with sarcasm. "But I'm sure we all understand why, don't we?" Laughter rippled through the room again, this time louder and more confident. Evelyn lowered her head, her hands trembling as they tightly clasped together, her eyes squeezed shut as if trying to escape the harsh reality before her. A few colleagues glanced at Evelyn, their looks no longer hiding pity mixed with mockery. A cold, suffocating atmosphere enveloped Evelyn, drowning her in a deep sense of humiliation and helplessness. But just as Evelyn seemed like she couldn't endure anymore, a strong, unexpected sound cut through the room. The loud, firm swing of the auditorium door, making the entire room, once filled with laughter, fall into instant silence. A young man walked in, tall and confident, exuding an air of authority. Nathan appeared, dressed in a sharp, well-tailored dark suit with a pristine white shirt. The most prominent feature of his outfit was the shiny silver NASA badge proudly pinned to his chest, a clear, unmistakable symbol of his profession and position. The sudden appearance caused the room to fall completely silent. All the eyes that had been filled with doubt now focused on Nathan, as if they were trying to confirm what was unfolding before them. Mitchell, who had moments ago been brimming with confidence and mockery, now stood frozen, his eyes showing a mix of astonishment and a hint of confusion. Nathan walked slowly and steadily toward the center of the room. Every step he took echoed in the absolute silence of the space, like a firm statement of his true presence and worth. His eyes quickly scanned the room, calm but undeniably cold and authoritative. Then he spotted Evelyn standing in the corner, her shoulders trembling with emotion and anxiety. He gave her a gentle smile, his eyes filled with reassurance and comfort, as if to say, "Don't worry, Mom, I'm here." Mitchell regained his composure and quickly adjusted his tone to mask the initial discomfort. He forced a polite smile, though inside he felt a discomfort that was hard to express. With the self-control he was known for, he spoke, "Hello, you must be the person Mrs. Evelyn Carter mentioned. Could you introduce yourself to us?" Nathan locked eyes with Mitchell, his gaze not only that of a confident young man, but one filled with authority, making Mitchell suddenly feel as though he no longer held the upper hand. Nathan calmly took the microphone, walked up to the podium, and turned to face the entire room. "Hello, everyone. I am Nathan Carter, a communications systems engineer at NASA, and just as my mother, Mrs. Evelyn Carter, said, I am her son." Nathan's words were short but firm, resonating clearly in the silence of the room. No one dared to make a sound, all seemingly drawn into the undeniable truth unfolding right before their eyes. Faces that were once full of skepticism now shifted to ones of surprise and a touch of embarrassment. Nathan's gaze turned back to his mother, this time filled with tenderness, pride, and a determined sense of protection. Evelyn remained still, her eyes now blurred with emotion. She saw in her son's eyes not only unwavering trust, but also a clear affirmation that she would never have to face hurt and pain alone again. Nathan then turned back to face Mitchell, his gaze not harsh but filled with quiet challenge, as if sending a clear message to the man. "From now on, never underestimate my mother again." Mitchell fell silent, his eyes for the first time looking away, unable to maintain the smugness he had earlier. For the first time in many years he felt the weight of the truth and self-respect, things he had always thought he could easily control or dismiss. And in that moment, the entire room understood that things would never be the same again. Nathan's appearance wasn't just to defend his mother. It was a clear declaration that the truth would never be belittled, no matter who spoke it or from what position. Nathan stood tall at the podium, his calm demeanor completely contrasting with the tense, awkward atmosphere that had enveloped the entire hall. His gaze swept across the room, gentle yet commanding, as if to ensure that every eye was fixed upon him. Evelyn, quietly standing in the corner of the room, felt her heart pounding with every beat, knowing that every word Nathan was about to speak carried immense meaning for her. Nathan took a deep breath and began speaking in a deep, clear, and strong voice. "I am Nathan Carter, currently a senior engineer at NASA, responsible for the communication systems between Earth and the spacecraft on Mars. Specifically, my job involves building and ensuring the stability of satellites, ground control stations, and signal transmission systems, allowing scientists on Earth to easily communicate and exchange information with the exploration robots on the Red Planet." Nathan's simple yet clear words immediately had a more powerful effect than he had imagined. The room fell completely silent, each person seemingly holding their breath, their eyes wide open, staring at Nathan, a mixture of astonishment and confusion in their expressions. The colleagues who had once doubted and ridiculed Evelyn now stood frozen, none daring to make a sound. Nathan paused for a moment, just long enough for his words to sink into the minds of everyone present. He understood that those eyes had once looked at his mother with suspicion and ridicule, and that only made him more determined to clarify what was to come. "I've spent nearly 10 years at NASA, participating in numerous major projects. The system I oversee does more than just help humanity explore the universe. It also helps us better understand our own planet. But the most important thing I want to say today is not just about my work or my achievements. I'm here today, first and foremost, to make one thing clear. My mother, Mrs. Evelyn Carter, has been telling the complete truth." When Nathan mentioned Evelyn's name, he turned to look at her with pride and affection. Evelyn felt a surge of emotion rising in her chest, her eyes welling up as she saw the confidence, strength, and love radiating from her son. In that moment, all of her doubts and fears seemed to vanish, replaced by a deep sense of pride and emotion stronger than anything she had ever felt. The people who had once doubted Evelyn were now feeling an indescribable sense of shame. The secretary, who had mocked Evelyn the most earlier, now fell silent, her eyes shifting away in avoidance. Several other teachers couldn't hide their embarrassment, lowering their heads in shame, unable to look directly at Evelyn. But the most notable reaction came from Mr. Mitchell, who had always expressed the most open suspicion and contempt. Now standing frozen like a statue, his usual confidence completely gone, replaced by an unmistakable sense of helplessness and shame. Nathan continued in a calm but resolute tone. "My mother is the humblest woman I've ever known. She has always silently endured and sacrificed so that I could be where I am today. It is truly saddening that my mother was ever doubted and ridiculed by the very people who should have been the first to support and encourage her. I hope that from now on we can all learn to listen more, understand more, and, most importantly, respect the truth and those who speak it, no matter who they are or what job they do." Nathan's words were a powerful reminder to everyone in the room, but also a heartfelt encouragement to his mother. Evelyn remained still in the corner, her eyes never leaving Nathan, not even for a second. For the first time in many years, she felt clearly that she no longer had to lower her head. The son she had raised with all her love was now a strong, confident man, standing up to protect her before the entire world. In the audience, Mr. Mitchell stood still, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to conceal the growing embarrassment and shame within him. He couldn't deny the truth that had just unfolded before him. He could find no argument to contradict Nathan's words. For the first time in his life, he felt his power and authority shaken, completely toppled by the truth he had once despised. Nathan gently placed the microphone down and turned to step away from the podium. But before returning to his mother's side, he paused for a moment, his gaze locking with Mr. Mitchell's one more time, this time with a sternness, a wordless warning, confirming that from now on his mother would no longer endure any disrespect. Evelyn stood in silence, her heart now overflowing with emotion. She didn't know what more to say except to silently thank life for giving her such an amazing son as Nathan. And in her heart there was now one thing clearer than ever. No matter how harsh life may get, she would always have Nathan by her side, to love, protect, and give her an unwavering belief in the power of truth and self-respect. Stepping down from the podium, Nathan didn't immediately leave his position. He paused for a moment, his calm gaze sweeping over the auditorium, where the faces that had been filled with skepticism just moments ago were now bowed low in shame and embarrassment. The silence in the hall at that moment was not simply a void, it was heavy with regret, with thoughts deeply felt about how quickly people had judged and looked down on others. Nathan gave a slight smile, a gentle one, but enough to break the tense atmosphere that had enveloped everyone. He spoke in a deep, warm voice, but this time his tone was softer, more approachable, as if trying to soothe the awkwardness and embarrassment that still lingered in the room. "I'd like to say a few more words before we finish. I know, sometimes, it's so easy to judge someone based on what we see or hear, but life is never that simple, and behind every person, every family, there are stories that deserve to be heard and respected. My mother has spent almost her entire life doing a very simple job, but it is that simplicity that makes me most proud." Nathan's heartfelt words rang out slowly, clearly, and profoundly, making everyone in the room feel as if a cool stream of water had touched their souls, easing the heavy, shameful feelings they had been carrying. Evelyn remained standing silently in the corner of the room, her eyes filled with tears, but she no longer felt the same shame or helplessness she had before. Instead, she felt an unprecedented lightness, as if all the burdens and wounds she had endured were gradually being lifted and drifting away. Standing there, quietly watching her son speak with sincerity before all those who had doubted her, Evelyn understood that Nathan was not only defending her, but also defending the value of self-respect and pride for all the quiet people who lived around them. Nathan paused for a moment, looking around the room once more. In that brief moment, his gaze landed on Mr. Mitchell, who was now standing still, his usual serious demeanor replaced by confusion and unease. Nathan looked at him calmly, without reproach, but with enough sharpness for Mitchell to clearly feel the seriousness of the words that were about to be spoken. "I think the most important thing a school can teach its students is not just the lessons from textbooks," Nathan said slowly, his voice firm, but still composed, "but how we respect one another, how we protect each person's dignity and belief. Every individual deserves to be proud of themselves and their family, no matter what job they do, no matter where they come from." Nathan looked around the room again, this time seeing many eyes beginning to light up, as if they had started to understand and empathize with what he had just said. Some colleagues lowered their heads in thought, while others exchanged furtive glances, a sense of regret appearing on their faces, as if they had just realized how they had hurt an innocent person. Evelyn was now completely calm, standing straighter. She could feel the eyes of the others beginning to turn toward her, but this time those eyes were no longer mocking or condescending. Instead, they were filled with guilt, sympathy, and even respect. Nathan finally looked back at Mr. Mitchell, and this time His gaze seemed to carry a special message just for him, a message gentle but strong enough to awaken anyone. I hope this school will always be a place that encourages dreams, not a place that extinguishes them. That simple sentence struck Mitchell like an invisible arrow, piercing deep into his heart. He felt his heart skip a beat. He understood exactly what Nathan was saying, that he had once ridiculed and looked down on Evelyn simply because he didn't believe what she said. Didn't believe that a woman who worked as a janitor could raise such a talented child. Nathan's words were gentle but razor-sharp, echoing in Mitchell's mind, making it impossible for him to deny that he, too, had played a part in wounding someone else's self-respect and pride. He lowered his head, feeling a deep and sincere guilt for the first time. Nathan stepped down from the podium and walked toward his mother. He took her trembling hands, squeezing them gently as if to pass on to her all the strength and confidence she had lost over the years. Evelyn looked at her son, her eyes filled with pride and profound emotion. In that moment, everyone in the auditorium understood that Nathan's words weren't just to protect his mother. They were a powerful reminder of human dignity, respect, and the self-worth that everyone deserves. They realized that every word spoken could either be a sharp knife that hurts others or a warm light that sparks faith and hope. And in that moment, everyone in the auditorium learned an important lesson. A lesson about kindness, respect, and most importantly, the lesson that we must never look down on the dreams and pride of others. The presentation had just ended, and a few seconds of silence hung in the air before murmurs and light conversations began to fill the room again. But this time, the words were no longer laced with mockery or skepticism. Instead, there was an unmistakable sense of awkwardness and embarrassment visible on every face and in every gesture of those present. Everyone understood that the truth Nathan had just shared had completely changed their thoughts and attitudes, especially toward Evelyn. Evelyn stood silently next to Nathan, her hands still trembling slightly. The pride and emotion from seeing her son defend her kept her steady, but deep inside, she knew that the wounds from before could not be easily erased with just words or a sympathetic glance. What she needed now was not pity or shallow comfort, but sincere respect, something she had long been deprived of by those standing before her. The colleagues who had once mocked and doubted her now slowly made their way toward Evelyn. Their steps were slow and hesitant, their eyes lowered, avoiding direct contact with hers. Some tried to smile lightly to ease the awkwardness, but their smiles couldn't hide the deep shame they felt. First came the principal's secretary, the one who had publicly ridiculed Evelyn the most, now approaching her with an expression full of regret. "Mrs. Evelyn, I'm truly sorry. I was too quick to speak without thinking. I'm so ashamed of my actions." Evelyn looked at the woman before her, with eyes that were gentle but firm. She nodded softly. "Thank you for saying that, but I hope that from now on you will think more carefully before judging others." The secretary lowered her head, her face still flushed with embarrassment. Evelyn didn't say anything more, not reproaching her but also not allowing any superficial words of comfort. To Evelyn, true remorse wasn't just shown in words, but must be proven through sincere actions later on. Next came several other teachers, each one stepping forward to Evelyn, softly apologizing with voices sometimes trembling. "Evelyn, I'm really sorry for the wrong thoughts I had about you. I really shouldn't have done that. I completely misunderstood you. Please forgive me." Each person was met with Evelyn's calm and gentle gaze, but she never allowed that kindness to turn into easy forgiveness or consolation. To her, true sincerity always required time to prove itself. Still, she didn't try to make it hard for anyone, because she knew that right now their own embarrassment was punishment enough. At the far corner of the room, Robert Mitchell remained still, his hands clasped tightly together in tension. He had watched the entire event unfold, each colleague's apology like a bell of realization ringing in his mind. But this time, he didn't have the courage to approach Evelyn as the others had. Mitchell knew that the hurt he had caused Evelyn was unlike anyone else's. It was deeper and more painful. A simple apology now couldn't possibly make up for the pain he had inflicted on this kind, gentle woman. Mitchell vividly remembered every cruel word, every mocking glance he had directed at Evelyn. Now all of it weighed heavily on his heart. He had always prided himself on his ability to control and understand others, but this time he had failed miserably in recognizing the true value of Evelyn and her son. For the first time in his life, Mitchell felt an overwhelming sense of regret and deep remorse for his actions. In the distance, Evelyn caught a glimpse of Mitchell standing quietly by himself, but she had no intention of approaching him. She understood that it was now Mitchell who needed to step beyond the shame and guilt he was carrying, not her. Nathan stood beside his mother, observing everything with both a stern and empathetic gaze. He understood exactly what his mother was thinking and fully supported the way she was handling the situation. Nathan didn't want his mother to easily let go of the hurt, but he also didn't want her to become someone who shut her heart off entirely. He only wanted her to keep her head high, walking forward with the pride and self-respect she had always maintained. Finally, Evelyn looked around the room once more, realizing that all the people who had doubted her could now understand the important lesson about respect and self-esteem that Nathan had emphasized earlier. The apologies, whether sincere or shallow, were just the first step in their journey to right the wrongs they had done. As for Mitchell, he remained standing silently from afar, unwilling to take another step closer. For him, saying sorry wasn't something he could do lightly. It would force him to face the most profound mistake of his life, a mistake he never thought he would make. And in that moment, both Evelyn and Mitchell understood that to heal the wounds in one's heart, a sincere apology is never too late, but it always requires great courage, something Mitchell had yet to find within his own heart, full of pride but also fraught with insecurity. As the evening light faded, the halls of Prescott School grew quiet, with only a few faint sounds coming from distant classrooms. Evelyn continued her work, silently finishing up her tasks for the day, cleaning the second-floor hallway, far from the auditorium where the morning's presentation had just taken place. She felt a little more at ease now, no longer having to face the guilty glances and awkward apologies from her colleagues. She understood that today's event not only changed the way people viewed her, but also altered the deep thoughts inside each of them. And that was enough for her. As she was diligently wiping down the windows, Evelyn suddenly heard footsteps approaching slowly. She turned her head and immediately locked eyes with Robert Mitchell, the last person she expected to see at this moment. Mitchell stood a few meters away, seemingly having been there for a while, silently observing her with a complicated expression, a mixture of embarrassment and confusion like she had never seen before. The atmosphere around them became strangely tense. Evelyn paused her work, stood up straight, and calmly looked at Mr. Mitchell, her gaze no longer avoiding or hesitating. She said nothing, simply standing there, waiting for Mitchell to speak first. After a few moments of hesitation, Mitchell took a small step forward toward Evelyn. He tried to start speaking, but his voice was hoarse and shaky, unnaturally so. "Evelyn, I wanted to talk to you for a moment." Evelyn remained silent, her gaze steady on Mr. Mitchell, showing no anger or resentment, only a calmness that made Mitchell even more uncomfortable. He swallowed hard, struggling to find the right words to express what he wanted to say, but every word seemed to choke in his throat. I want to explain a little about what happened the other day. Mitchell stammered, attempting to justify himself. I really didn't mean to hurt you. Maybe I was just joking. I didn't think. Immediately, Evelyn gently but firmly raised her hand, cutting off Mitchell's increasingly awkward justifications. She looked at him with a rare seriousness, and for the first time, Evelyn's normally soft voice rang out clearly, strong and decisive. Mr. Mitchell, I think you don't need to justify yourself anymore. You know better than anyone what you did, and I know it too. Her words weren't loud, but they echoed sharply in the quiet hallway. Mitchell froze, his hand instinctively clenching, his head bowing as if he were trying to avoid the sharp yet composed gaze of the woman he had once looked down upon. Evelyn continued calmly. You may think that a laugh, a little joke, doesn't cause anything serious. But you can't imagine, just that one laugh was enough to break someone's self-esteem. You should remember that well. Evelyn's words were soft, but sharp, like an invisible needle piercing deep into Mitchell's heart. He felt each word she spoke was accurate, painfully real, and he couldn't deny or defend himself against anything she said. Mitchell remained silent, his head bowed lower, the feeling of shame and regret swelling more intensely than ever. He had never had to face such a deep, yet gentle reproach before. Evelyn didn't raise her voice or show anger, but it was her calmness and determination in her words and gaze that made Mitchell feel the most pain and shame. Finally, after a long silence, Mitchell tried to lift his head and look at Evelyn once more, his eyes filled with sincerity and remorse. Evelyn, you're right. I truly apologize. I was wrong to look down on you. I shouldn't have done that. Evelyn looked at him, her eyes still calm, but now they softened slightly. She understood that his apology was genuine, but she also knew that the deepest remorse was yet to come, through the way Mitchell would change his actions and attitudes after today. Thank you for understanding, Evelyn said gently, her voice now softer, as though helping him out of his embarrassment. But what's more important is that you remember, each of us has our own self-respect, and no one deserves to endure being looked down upon, not even in the smallest way. Mitchell listened in silence, clearly feeling that Evelyn's words were sinking deep into his mind, forcing him to reconsider his whole perspective on the people around him, on the true value of every individual. Evelyn turned back to continue her work, not saying anything more, leaving Mitchell alone with the thoughts now swirling in his mind. He stood still, his eyes still fixed on the cold tile floor beneath him, a wave of guilt and shame washing over him that he couldn't escape. And in that moment, both Evelyn and Mitchell understood that their brief conversation had completely changed the relationship between them. Mitchell was facing himself for the first time, confronting the harm he had caused others, especially the woman he had once looked down on, but who stood before him with quiet strength and self-respect. He knew that, after today, things could never go back to the way they were. Evelyn's gentle yet profound words would always be the strongest reminder of how he should live, how he should treat those around him, and most importantly, he would never again dare to look down on anyone. The following days passed in an unusual silence at Prescott School. No one spoke further about the events of that day, but it seemed that everyone understood that Nathan's words still silently echoed in the minds of each person, becoming a profound lesson that no one could easily forget. For Mr. Mitchell, however, each day at school had now become a quiet, difficult challenge. He still wore his usual stern expression when standing before the students, but deep in his mind there was a chaotic mixture of regret and embarrassment. The private encounter with Evelyn that day kept resurfacing vividly in his memories, especially her words. A single laugh can shatter someone's self-esteem. That statement rang like an incessant bell in Mitchell's head, forcing him to face himself, and the mistakes he had once thought harmless. From that day on, whenever he happened to encounter Evelyn at school, Mitchell would silently avoid her gaze. The guilt and awkwardness made it impossible for him to look directly at the woman he had once held in contempt. Evelyn's silence, without anger or reproach, only added to his torment, like a quiet reminder of how deeply his mistake had wounded her. Finally, after several days of struggling with his thoughts, Mitchell decided to do something he had never done for anyone before: write a heartfelt apology letter to Evelyn. That evening, he sat alone in his small office, facing a blank sheet of paper and his familiar pen. He sighed, picked up the pen, but immediately put it down again. For the first time in his life, Mitchell found it difficult to search for the right words to express his thoughts. He sat in silence for a long while, memories flooding back more vividly than ever. Mitchell remembered Evelyn's deeply hurt expression when she stepped down from the podium after he had mocked her in front of everyone. He recalled every disappointed, wounded glance she had tried to hide over the days. For the first time, he asked himself, how many others had he unknowingly hurt with his arrogant attitude and thoughtless words? After over an hour of inner conflict, Mitchell finally picked up the pen and began writing the first few words. Dear Mrs. Evelyn, I know this letter may surprise you, but I need to say this, or I will never forgive myself. I want to offer you my sincerest apologies for what I did. I was wrong, completely wrong, to dismiss you simply because of the job you do and your humble appearance. My arrogance blinded me, and I failed to see your true worth and that of your family. I once thought that a careless joke wouldn't cause any serious harm, but you have made me realize the huge mistake I made. Your words the other day in the hallway have made me think deeply. Indeed, a laugh that seems harmless can destroy someone's self-esteem. I never realized that I could be the one to hurt someone else so badly. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I truly hope that over time, I can prove to you that I have changed, not just in words, but through my actions and a genuine respect for everyone. Thank you for helping me learn this invaluable lesson. I will always remember what you said, and I will never make this mistake again. Sincerely, Robert Mitchell. Mitchell set down his pen and looked at the letter he had just written. For the first time, he felt a slight sense of relief, although the guilt remained deep within him. He carefully folded the letter, knowing that he had done the right thing, but also understanding that what he had just done was only the small first step on the long journey he needed to take to make amends for his past mistakes. The next morning, Evelyn arrived at school as usual. When she opened the small door leading into the janitor's supply room, she saw a small envelope neatly placed on her old wooden desk. The envelope had her name written on it in clear, yet slightly shaky handwriting. It was unmistakably Mr. Mitchell's handwriting. Evelyn picked up the letter, a momentary surprise crossing her face, but she quickly guessed what it might contain. She opened the letter and read each line slowly, her eyes calm and contemplative. She could feel that each word, each sentence was sincere, not the hollow apologies she had heard before. Evelyn knew that this letter was a significant effort for Mitchell to face himself. After reading the letter, Evelyn folded it carefully and placed it in the small drawer of her desk. She didn't write a reply, nor did she have any intention of approaching Mitchell again to say anything further. She understood that the things that needed to be said had been clearly expressed by her that day, and now it was Mitchell who needed time to fully grasp the value of the lesson he had just experienced. Evelyn smiled softly and continued with her familiar cleaning tasks. She knew that, even though Mitchell might still be in pain and regret, that very pain would help him grow, teaching him to respect others more. And that, in the end, was the most important thing. And in that moment, both Evelyn and Mitchell understood an important truth. The most painful lessons often come from seemingly small mistakes, but it is these mistakes that help one realize the true value of compassion, humility, and self-respect. This was a lesson Mitchell would never forget. A precious lesson Evelyn had quietly given him through her sincerity and deep self-respect. Since the day Mr. Mitchell's letter appeared on the small table in the supply room, a quiet but noticeable transformation had taken place at Prescott School. At first, it was just small, subtle changes, but gradually these shifts spread across the entire school, creating a wave of awareness that changed how everyone viewed and treated one another. The teachers, who had witnessed the entire story about Evelyn, became much more cautious in their words and actions. They began to think twice before judging someone based on their appearance, status, or profession. No more quiet laughter behind someone's back. No more condescending looks toward anyone just because of their humble appearance or ordinary job. Instead, everyone started showing a clearer respect for one another, no matter their profession, no matter where they came from. Evelyn felt the change most clearly. She continued to do her usual work each day, cleaning the long hallways, the classrooms filled with the sounds of laughing children. But what made her feel the most difference was the way people began to treat her. Now, whenever Evelyn appeared, she received more genuine smiles, polite greetings full of goodwill, sometimes even thoughtful inquiries from teachers who had previously ignored her. Not everyone who had once looked down on Evelyn came to apologize directly, but their actions were clear enough for her to understand that they truly felt regret and remorse for their past mistakes. Evelyn no longer demanded any apologies. She understood that the real apology she had been waiting for was the sincere change in how they treated her and those around her. Miss Julia, the young music teacher who had spoken out in Evelyn's defense that day, now often stopped to chat whenever she saw Evelyn around the school. Each time, Julia showed clear respect and admiration for Evelyn, not because her son worked at NASA, but simply because she recognized the true value of the humble yet strong woman before her. The way Julia spoke, the way she looked at Evelyn, made her feel the warmth of someone who genuinely respected and cherished her. Other staff members at the school, from the librarian to the administrative office workers, also began to show a distinct shift in attitude. The jokes that once unintentionally belittled someone no longer appeared. Thoughtless remarks were now replaced with sincere encouragement, or simply a gentle, respectful glance when they crossed paths in the hallways or during break time. As for Mr. Mitchell, after sending the apology letter to Evelyn, he began to grow quieter and more reserved. He still maintained his role as the homeroom teacher with his usual stern appearance, but everyone could see the change in how he treated others. No more arrogant, cold behavior or sarcastic remarks. Instead, there was a noticeable humility, sometimes even a bit of caution whenever he spoke or addressed the group. Though Mr. Mitchell never mentioned the past story to anyone again, the clear transformation in him was the most explicit acknowledgement that he had recognized his deep mistake. Whenever he saw Evelyn, he always offered her a gentle nod from afar, no longer avoiding her as he had before, but also not intentionally stepping closer. Evelyn knew that Mitchell was now trying to make amends for his past wrongs with sincere actions, and that brought her a sense of peace. One afternoon during break time, as Evelyn was diligently cleaning the playground corner, a small group of young teachers approached her. They brought with them cold drinks and politely invited her to join them for a chat, speaking to her warmly as if Evelyn had never been treated unfairly before. That simple act deeply moved Evelyn, for she knew it wasn't just a shallow gesture of comfort, but the most genuine change in how they saw her true worth. "Thank you so much," Evelyn gently replied, her eyes shining brighter than ever. For the first time, she felt like she was truly part of this small community, no longer standing on the sidelines in loneliness and humiliation. The teachers smiled warmly at Evelyn, and one young teacher softly said, "No, we should be thanking you, Evelyn. You and your son have taught us so much about respect and kindness." Evelyn didn't respond, merely giving a gentle nod of gratitude. To her, nothing could make her happier than realizing her story had truly touched each person's heart, making them change for the better. That was the greatest success that she and Nathan had achieved. From a distance, Mr. Mitchell stood silently observing the scene. He didn't approach, but in his heart, he felt an odd sense of relief and peace. He knew that he and everyone else had learned a valuable lesson from the simple woman he had once looked down on. It was Evelyn who had taught him a lesson in humility, in respecting the true worth of every person, no matter who they were or what they did. Evelyn returned to her work, continuing to wipe down each window with a gentle, serene smile. She understood that, from this moment on, no one at the school would dare look down on anyone because of their appearance or job, and she also knew that these small but sincere changes were the greatest reward life could offer her after all the pain she had endured. In the days that followed, Prescott School gradually returned to its peaceful rhythm, but the most important change was that the small school had truly transformed from the inside out. Every teacher, every staff member, now saw each other with new eyes. No more judgment, no more haste, no more invisible biases that had hurt so many people. They all learned to appreciate the true value of each individual, and realized that everyone has their own story that deserves to be heard and understood. Meanwhile, Evelyn continued her simple daily work with tranquility and peace. She had not changed the way she lived, still working diligently and humbly. But now, more than ever, she felt that the values she had always quietly protected, sincerity, self-respect, and patience, had finally been seen and respected by everyone. That, for Evelyn, was the greatest joy in her heart. On a weekend evening, Nathan returned home after several busy days at NASA. He walked into the familiar small house, the place where he always felt most at peace. Evelyn was in the kitchen preparing dinner, the sound of cooking utensils gently echoing like a familiar song that Nathan longed to hear after a long, stressful day. "I'm home, Mom." Nathan softly stepped into the kitchen, gently embracing Evelyn's small shoulders. She turned to look at him, her kind and warm smile soothing Nathan's heart, easing the pressures of his work at NASA. "Just in time, I've made your favorite soup." Evelyn smiled gently, speaking as she set the food on the small but cozy dining table for the two of them. Nathan pulled out a chair and sat down, his eyes never leaving his mother. In that moment, he felt more clearly than ever that all the achievements he had today came from the quiet sacrifices and courage of Evelyn. His mother had never been celebrated by the world like the astronauts, nor had anyone known her as a great woman, but in Nathan's heart, she was the greatest person he had ever known. "Mom," Nathan spoke gently but sincerely, "you know, you're the strongest person I've ever known. NASA can send people to space, but you're the one who got me to where I am today." Evelyn froze, her heart stirred by Nathan's words. Her eyes misted over, but this time, not because of hurt, but from a deep emotion, a pride that she had never allowed herself to express so clearly before. She gently took Nathan's hand, her eyes full of love and trust. "Nathan, I only did what any other mother would do. You are the greatest pride of my life." Nathan smiled, knowing his mother had always been humble and simple, but it was this humility that made him love and respect her even more. He nodded softly and continued, his voice steady but strong. "Mom, I want you to always remember that everything you do, no matter how small it may seem to others, is always something huge to me. And you should also remember that no one has the right to look down on you or anyone else just because of the job they do or their appearance. Your value, everyone's value, lies inside, in the sincerity and self-respect we hold on to. Evelyn listened in silence to each word Nathan spoke, every sentence reaching deep into her heart. She understood that the story they had just shared was not only their story, but also a shared story of all those who had ever been hurt by prejudice, by the unjust disregard of society. But the most important thing was how we rise after those wounds, the way Nathan had stood up to protect his mother, the way Evelyn had held her self-respect through all the storms. Nathan looked deeply into his mother's eyes once more, his voice now louder and clearer, as if he were sending this message not only to her, but to everyone out there. Every person deserves respect. Every family has a story to be proud of. We can never look down on anyone just based on their appearance or their profession. Never let prejudice extinguish anyone's dream or pride, because the truth and worth of a person never need permission from others, only the courage to speak it. Evelyn smiled gently, her heart now completely at peace. She knew that, after all the challenges and hurt, the most important thing she had learned was the value of courage and self-respect. And she knew that the profound message Nathan had just shared would echo forever in her heart and in the hearts of all those who had witnessed their story. That evening, in the small yet warm kitchen, Evelyn and Nathan continued to talk, sharing their everyday stories. Evelyn looked at her son with eyes full of love and pride, not just from Nathan's work at NASA, but from the character, strength, and kindness he always held within. And in that peaceful moment, Evelyn understood that their story was not just about a mother who worked as a janitor and a son who was an engineer at NASA. It was a story about courage, about the true value of a person, and above all, it was the most profound message that she and Nathan wanted to share with everyone. We can never look down on anyone based on their appearance or profession. Every person deserves respect. Every family has a story to be proud of. Never let prejudice extinguish anyone's dream or pride, because the truth and worth of a person never need permission from others, only the courage to speak it. Evelyn and Nathan's story was not just about self-respect and courage, but a powerful reminder that each of us has the right to be proud of who we are and where we come from, regardless of the work we do or the labels society might place on us. Never let prejudice hurt or hinder anyone's dreams, because the truth always deserves to be heard and respected. What about you? Have you ever been looked down upon or misunderstood because of your appearance or your job? Share your story in the comments. If you found this story meaningful, please share the video to spread this beautiful message, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring and heartfelt stories. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.